Good afternoon. I'm not on the beach at Byron today. As you can see, I'm actually down on a bush track not far from my house, which goes along beside the ocean, where I've done a video before where all the oyster farms are. So we're going to pass a few oyster farms. And I was going to say how lovely the weather is as usual, but it's not. It's been raining constantly. It just reminded me of a conversation I had with a friend a few days ago about challenges that we're all facing at the moment. And one of the tools I use when faced with challenges is to watch the Jocko Willink video on YouTube called Good, which was about the concept. And so I suppose it's an extension of the concept of Viktor Frankl in Man's Search for Meaning, about looking for a positive meaning in everything in your life. And, you know, it's been raining a lot and haven't been able to get to the beach and get some sun, but the gardening has been amazing because the soil is really easy to dig now. So even though I haven't been getting some sun on the beach, I've been doing a lot of gardening and digging and planting because it's so much easier now than the usual hard soil that we have, and I'm really finding it easy to dig in the garden. So it's the Jocko Willink video on YouTube called Good. He's an ex-Navy SEAL. I haven't trained with Navy SEALs. I nearly trained with some US Rangers, but I've trained in urban survival, urban evasion, wilderness survival, with Rich Hungerford up on the Sunshine Coast of Australia, who's ex-SAS, and highly recommend doing some of his warrior training if you get a chance to when you're in Australia. So I've got a few things to talk about today, and as usual these things are consistent with my two foundational principles. The first one being that true health comes from living in harmony with nature's rhythms, as consistent with the Gaia theory, which states that all living organisms and their inorganic surroundings have evolved together as a single living system. Also consistent with the statement by Carl Friston that the anatomy of any organism must contain within it a model of the environment in which it is immersed, which means that we are part of the universe is part of us, because we're all made up of fractal patterns. And the second foundational principle is that Bitcoin is part of the peaceful revolution. It's money for the people, by the people. So if you want to hear about the things I'm going to discuss today, which is fungus and hyphae, how they grow, Candida and iron, should we use iron, should we not use iron, and iodine and thyroid autoimmune disease, should we use iodine or should we not use iodine, and finally I'm going to talk a little bit about Bitcoin compared to gold. Is there an advantage of Bitcoin over the traditional store of value, which has been gold for thousands of years? So if you're interested in any of that, keep watching. We're going to dive right in. Right, so what's the first one I'm talking about? Fungi and hyphae. So hyphae are the little tendrils that the fungal organism sends out to grow and source nutrients. And because a fungus doesn't have a digestive system like us, it secretes its digestive juices from its hyphae to break down food and be able to absorb the nutrients from its environment. So it sends out these hyphae for, fungus in the ground, sends them out for miles to source nutrients, explore its environment. And that's one of the reasons why fungus is so hard to treat. Some of the reasons are that fungus, the cell of a fungus, because we have evolved from the same lineage, not prokaryotes, but we've evolved from eukaryotes, and fungus was the first eukaryote, which means that we contain mitochondria. Because our cells are very similar as compared to a bacteria or a virus, which got very different cells, very different metabolisms, very different ways they source energy from the environment. It's very hard to damage a fungal cell without also damaging our cells. Fungi also produce biofilms, which is the layer of mucus which surrounds colonies of microorganisms, and they secrete mycotoxins, which are poisons, biological poisons. And those mycotoxins suppress our immune system, so we don't get much help in fighting these infections because they paralyze our immune system. Very good. Hello. It's a very good Sun Tzu art of war strategy, that if you don't want to fight a war, you're going to paralyze your enemy's military first. Switch off there. If it doesn't matter how many tanks you've got, if you've got no petrol to drive the tanks, run the tanks on, it's not going to be a very effective military system. So they've got biofilms, they've got mycotoxins, they suppress our immune system, they're very similar to our cells, and they've got this hyphae which grow through the tissues. They actually grow out through our tissues in our body, breaking down nutrients. Fungus is critical for the world. It converts the dead and dying back to soil. We just don't want to have that happen to us prematurely, which is what happen if we get mould in our body. So the study came out this week documenting how comprehensive these hyphae spread through the soil and get around barriers that get in the way. And it's fascinating. So if anybody suspects they've got a mould problem, they should see a health practitioner familiar with the treatment of mould, and having a strategy to find a solution to the hyphae spreading throughout the tissues is just as important, is an important part of the treatment process. Second thing I want to talk about was the study which came out this week about Candida and iron. And it turns out that Candida, which is a yeast in our guts, which is there in everybody, but in some people, for whatever reason, it can overgrow and cause problems, has what's called hemophores. Now, Candida needs iron to grow and thrive, and it steals that from us. So these hemophores are like giant magnets inside the Candida, which basically suck the iron from our cells to our cell membranes, when the Candida basically engulfs that iron sucked to their cell membrane and uses it for itself. So they can cause us to be iron deficient, like intestinal parasites. So there's a problem. So now we're iron deficient, which is not very good for us, and the Candida's got all the iron, which is good for it. So the question then becomes, should we use iron for ourselves? Well, of course, if we don't have iron, we're tired all the time. So if we use iron to fix our iron deficiency, we feed the Candida. But if we starve ourselves of iron to starve the Candida, we become profoundly iron deficient. And iron is how you carry oxygen around the body, and your immune system needs oxygen because your immune system is powered by mitochondria. It's one of the tissues, the cells with the most mitochondria in the body. So if you're iron deficient, you're going to be switching off your mitochondria. So it's a difficult situation. And so there's some studies being done on the use of lactoferrin. And I get my lactoferrin from bovine colostrum. And lactoferrin has been shown that to be able to starve the Candida of the iron without starving us of iron. So we can still have a normal diet with iron in it, but still starve the Candida. So that was some really interesting research. And it kind of leads me on to the next study, which was about iodine and thyroid autoimmune disease. Now we know iodine is incredibly important for the thyroid, and a lot of thyroid autoimmune disease comes because of our iodine deficiency. Just coming past the oyster farms now, you can see there, oysters one of the great foods, but of course the big problem with oysters is these days is microplastics. So if you're going to get oysters, find a good oyster farm which is in as pristine water as you can. So iodine, really good for the thyroid. If you're deficient in iodine, you're more likely to get, or selenium, more likely to get thyroid autoimmune disease. But once you get thyroid autoimmune disease, if you take iodine, you might flare it up. And the analogy I always use is that if you damage your knee in a ski accident, then you've got to do rehab. And doing squats will be part of that rehab. But you're sure as hell not going to be doing the same amount of squats that you did before you had the ski accident. You know, if you're doing 50 kilos of weight for your squats, you're not going to start doing your rehab with the amount of weight. You're going to start very, very low, probably with no weight at all, just doing squats. So this study was looking at what's the amount of iodine that we can use with autoimmune thyroid disease and not flare it up? What's the weight we can do squats with, which is not going to stuff up our knee rehab? And they found that it was about 300 micrograms. Now the RDA of iodine, they say, is 150 micrograms, and they found that even up to 300 micrograms of iodine, if it did flare up the thyroid, it was only slightly, and then it returned to normal fairly quickly. So that was interesting, which is again showing that these things which are good for our tissues, we might need to start very low dose while they recover before we get back onto high dose. All right, and the last thing I want to talk about was Bitcoin, and I read a interesting article today comparing Bitcoin to gold, and gold has been the store of value for thousands of years and was the most perfect money that we had until Bitcoin came along, and Bitcoin is digital scarcity. Now, one of the benefits of Bitcoin over gold is that it is truly scarce. We don't know how much gold is in the world, and there's probably a lot more gold in the world than we think there is, and we don't know who's got it. Bitcoin is digital scarcity, and there's only ever going to be 21 million Bitcoin, each one divided up, remember, into 100 million Satoshis. So people are always looking for really cheap cryptocurrencies to buy. Well, the cheapest cryptocurrencies to buy are Satoshis, which is because every Bitcoin's divided up into 100 million Satoshis. And unless you're Michael Saylor from MicroStrategy, you ain't buying Bitcoin. We're all buying Satoshis, trying to accumulate as much Bitcoin as we can. So that was one of the benefits, is its digital scarcity. Second benefit is that the problem with gold throughout history is that it's been confiscatable. Nothing to stop somebody coming along and taking your gold from you, whereas Bitcoin is not confiscatable. And also, the other problem with gold is storage. You've always had to trust somebody to store it for you. It's very difficult to store your own gold. You've got to give it to a third party to store it for you. Whereas Bitcoin, you store it on the blockchain. We've got wallets, hard and cold wallets, but you don't keep your Bitcoin in those. Those are just, remember I talked about that last week? They're just a treasure map, which allows you to get to the blockchain where your Bitcoin is stored. So Bitcoin, true digital scarcity, not confiscatable, and easily stored. Those are the advantages, according to the experts, and I'm not one, in Bitcoin over gold. All right, I've got a really busy day. I'm on a course all next week, so I'm going to get home and put this together. Peace and love. See you next week, hopefully from the beach with some sun.